You know the you get the okay, it's
No, we can say yes. This is an I'm Obama's here.
I did. I would be careful. How would I be obligated? Like this year when Kurt.
Yes.
Believe me, there's any other.
yeah, like here. It's not I want to show you okay, so all good practice.
I think probably a lot of people still have I don't and a lot of people
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry, I got a little excited. Yeah, fine. Good luck, you too. Good luck,
Everybody ready? Please, coaches, please.
I just want to make sure we can fill this class, bro.
Let's see.
We got 1 minute. Luck you too.
One of you.
Just to clarify, this ship with your card is like a Rex and P. It's just at the very bottom of your name. I do have the very bottom.
Sure.
This is just easy. I go.
I sent out the ones today. As soon as before you guys.
Sorry.
All the, I guess, like, finals. Yeah, us too. I don't have an actual script or anything, so I'm just kind of ahead. Of course, like all the coaches, Jared Zuckerman, Hegna, Andy, Ali Chase, Chris Fry. My mom's also here, which is kind of interesting in other ways, I guess. And of course, like Donish. And I've had a ton of other people be really influential on me throughout, the season of my debate career that I can't name in all the respect. And I'm really grateful for all of the competitors I've got to compete against, like Monta, Vista, and everyone at this tournament as well. I want to keep it really short because I don't have anything super meaningful to say about those thank yous. Okay. 1 AC should be sent. Is anybody not ready?
1 second. Okay, I'm good.
Contention 1 is desegregation. School segregation is rampant and racist. Black 17 racial segregation. 7 increased schools are segregated 50 years ago. Segregation is almost socially acceptable, even as well as section of race. Education, school color, you're right. The Gardendale judge found a desire to control racial democracy by eliminating black students. These were not enough substitution. There's a middle ground. Segregation, socially dynamics, racism, segregated social, and mentally unequal. Desegregation promotes cross-racial understanding of racial biases and stereotypes. Number 17, Department of Education acknowledging the importance of diversity racial. Diverse schools provide cross-racial understanding, break down racial stereotypes, eliminate bias, segregated schools promote social union. City after city shows desegregated schools are willing to reduction and student bullying use stereotypes. So which systems will stimulate promotion of racial hierarchy. Students of all races who attend desegregated schools are more likely to see desegregated colleges, workplace, and neighborhoods later in life. The most qualified race and comprehensive data agrees to video at all 17 effectiveness psychotic diversity and validation offers of analytic review for 713 independent samples for 500 moving center ergonomics including improved attitudes. Contact change how people perceive the relationship. Repeating inhibitor contact the outgroup become more rubber to the self-concept, which then leads to the intergroup level, the more positive outgroup attitude, contact reduce pressures, reducing group identity, categorization, you will categorize the categorization to the representation of versus them, orientation to the outcomes of contact people with more experience that will simplify by set of contact produces outcome and reminder to intergroup contact and eliminates your head there. Desegregation is key to life, self-determination, independently always. Adam 6 1 individual be free to choose their own indirectly integrated environment, radical integration, rejects essentials, and offensive retreat, segregation, revolution, initial, what secret claiming and often goes backwards, problematic because he jumped out. Trouble with ethical argument by looking at undeniable history, Thomas search of the race-based obstacle individually be overcome through the hard work of like individual institution and community. Government intervention, this work is self and rights society urging the systematic changes for inaccurate particular policy, position, criticism, moral psychology, literacy, historical and cultural understanding, Thomas vision of education, vessel understanding, important enhancing sector, providing access to social capital, info networks, morality, sound, theory, networks created by racial segregation, ground feed board, reduce racism, spur broader movements, and increase educational opportunity. Further action is key. Browsing 14. Render very acceptable warfare to the draft was legal, so new equality, the culminating passages of words, and even exact they begin American surgery, truly multiracial world nation before only one except for an African American better one through its held high school degree today. This year equals before only one out of 140 African American under college degree now more than one in 5 hold one other gains to the earth of black middle class and healthy instead. How cut the way black hair off and then LA fixing can say above my more than half segregation and the levels of education are the biggest contributors to youth mortality. Gilead 11 more recent research began to look at the contribution of subway youth mortality from school while outline using a systematic review of literature come on with vital statistics 47 setting men and the less 245,000 nothing new in the year worship the levels of education at 176,000 racial segregation 190,000 income inequality numbers that the research included severe low education comparable to heart attacks social leading cause USF and 2K schools are uniquely key enforcing desegregation and public education schools over Hollywood Republic enforcement that are benefits and whatever child desegregation racialization providing method beyond socioeconomic integration to equity advocates professional equality so with the school finance desegregation cooperating reforming to subject quality social menacing constitutional violation or desegregation you have a critical to connect the versus racial human effective racial discrimination education rather than the argument for sexual integration to or democracy school trips for liberal rights for remedy rights for certain for financial rights alone would not be enough to remove poverty racial isolation or minorities and there's racial hierarchy racial subordination. School desegregation costs a little way throughout the day, flows and sugar, mental health facilities, system of 30%. Police departments, New York desegregation cases may redefine the landscape, still government for decades to the case of right now, powerful tools for transformation, racial surgery, or any other major structural form litigation. The federal government is critical to advance, monitor, and enforce desegregation cases. Lily Walker, so if there are significant desegregation cases, the duty is to let you watch the right over the federal district court all here until the local government use all inter integration once the local school district still subject quarter degree with the restriction racial desegregation or taken under significance many of these cases remain different for the federal government will be decided by the administration and DOJ. You can all over here and comprehensive portion of the federal government's role and the federal government will have to take leading more specifically to 62 to illegitimate administrative cluster with student designated cluster of district court for the deceased using clusters and method that rules segregation or under provision and signal the DOJ into those over schools and power to collaborate with the DOJ schools are tactically attempting close to pending cases. Collaboration between all third branches is critical to overcome local resistance, provide political cover for more case integration and enforcement is a critical variable for emergency between legislative judicial executive branch collaborative serve the legislation operation to govern and play their unique powers to enforce desegregation. The incentive for complying with standards to receive funds cannot be understated. Court supervision led to compliance. Tangible one massive progress was accomplished. A study of more than 900 districts concluded that federal funding condition on desegregation compliance helped other districts desegregate as desegregation took back backlash and enforcement began. Congress continued to prevent additional rollback while the courts continue to expand remedies. The threat of fund cutoff increasing stronger HEW guidelines coming to change resistant to desegregation. Future efforts, especially not raised by local district, require federal capacity to enforce. And local implementation takes too long and is subject to circumvention. Black 10. The federal government inherently have a larger capacity most of who involvement can resolve problems testing and state legislation such as separation of partnership between state courts and state legislators, judicial election costs, state courts, reverse early decisions, state courts may be reaching their exhaustion points, so inequity cannot resolve in a single case or less instance requires daily evaluation and new commitment to the legislature, budget and school develop different state teaching and super realistic this might seek to ensure the federal government will stand alone in this matter for states act accordingly. Federal action is necessary to overcome local resistance which undermines state level reform, state-led integration efforts and carefully felt 11 10. Public education and least segregated federalization might be better suited to some matters of the state control to political factors and people reforms are so the state then at the federal level, federal intervention has been needed over the past 45 years to new state level address unequal opportunity coalitions equal look at the effects of the federal level programs brought to bear. It may be easier to overcome interest political power competing near words of the federal than in the state level state initiative that bring more integration have been largely instinctive with the political power of the suburbanians and state legislator plan the United States federal government should desegregate primary and secondary schools in the United States. Contention to this framing where racism outweighs only pragmatists themselves. Northern Carolina 16 given the Western National versus non-knowing Washington even not dismantle morally wrong and interest of real racism, you know, and it's morally comprehensive, and for values of premature land for racism, each student must have an access to universal sin, whatever the race or ethnicity or personality, university, and society, institution, or anyone itself in the racism, which is in the committed racism, can be intervice a set of such as the support as any institution, not to internalize racism, counselors have learned to work cross culture, we have ample ground for we cannot challenge racism or scholar classes, neither community succeed without not knowing any most facing overwhelming and dismaying us, as real and up to the open, so for racism, liberation, critical serious conversation, the involved in the treatment of minorities, person, colonialism, search for critique, and what way people objectively launch on responding to racism, not systematic, this linked to gender, class, sexual orientation, like the layer racism, and over the system, whether religion, center of the silent racism, and without any consideration, is mental of white people be in denial. Overcoming will take time and person to mirror perfect, trying to be decent people doing good work will make mistakes. We mirror people unfriendly, let's push ourselves anymore. It's helpful. Probability outweighs. Code 13, coach of incontinent, pedagogically unsounding debates, discontents words, successful focusing, organization, back functions, receptive, like necessity, always trying to excellent words of extinction magnitude. Would often outweigh this is a result of the word and therefore join your disadvantages of 100 hundreds of subject by the two are only handful learners journey suffering one or two components is zero. A team can deal with reaching focus on the burner for debate decision arguments of 100% or 50 arguments are considered 100% coordinated language unique evidence that there may be wonder with odds less than 50% of compliance each element there was source that were low connecting this interest and underlying let some mentions of the internal link chain reject the 1% restructure muscle 9 1% argument is incorrect and the like that's in the rules of many people as we know we cannot address some things we can course my coffee even though there's some things in order to pursue things we value and creature that are washing our principles beneath those people that are not since we know where discover perfect safety link not uniform and 12 15 troubles in the visual filter Jennifer 20 kingdom of one civil rules doing the regulation animals on the horse saying how we're going to regulation midwives or regulation tolerance of our own regulation that one agency that was in the regulation for title and nuclear changes made by SR check security theater Jackson Hole big threats distracted from the things that really hurt such as racial language American North China and other issues are unlikely the rules of society who know this increasing inequality from insecurity keep social structures as they are secure in the circle of next distracting inequality for sure through the fight and advances of permanently acquiesced security measures. Regs fail, should hero 14, or regs good, everything else fails, should hero 14. Regulatory process increase on new better regulation will be enforced in the insurance at level 1 to live back regulation within change in percentage administration, change in political governments will make the local policy and knowledge of the rules the regulation also increase like the regulated entity will comply with the policy and can knowledge of the rules subject to the rules and new agency and come out of fire even eliminate.
Okay.
Voice correct.
Okay.
Are you sending it out first?
Yeah. Okay.
So like, why do local schools in like Alabama comply with the plan?
The plan wouldn't be something that they have the choice of not complying with because of the methods we use to desegregate, like busing and redistricting.
So what do you mean by they don't have the choice?
Like, if students are being bused to their schools, they can't not let them in. The plan's also like illegal, so it, you know, enforces people breaking the law
So
the
like,
way any other kind of thing would
where
be
does
enforced.
buses come from? Are the states required to do that?
Are the states required to provide buses?
Or like the school districts?
I honestly am not sure.
Well, like to answer kind of the first part of the question, there's an enforcement mechanism of funding cutoff, and our evidence is that that's been historically effective.
So what is the threshold for a funding cutoff? Like, at what point does
Especially
it?
for NFIB links.
Yeah, I know. but,
Okay,
like,
we'll just take you up. Yeah, that's terrible.
Just answer the question.
Yeah,
What's
so
the threshold?
funding
like,
cutoff.
so like, let's say the federal government's like, you need to have this like percentage of white kids, this percentage of black kids, etc. Like, at what point, like, how far off does the school have to be to trigger the funding cutoff?
Oh, so like, what's the threshold for segregation? I think the Holly Walker evidence describes that. It says that there would be kind of a data mechanism where the federal government would be able to identify it. If there's
Like, I understand that the
perceptible
mechanism is
racial
data. I'm
isolation.
asking, when do we trigger the funding cutoff?
So it's like if there's identified racial isolation.
So when, yeah, right. But like, what is racial isolation as defined by the DOE?
As defined by the DOE, I don't know if there's like a clear definition, but if like one black student was in a classroom of all white folk, that would obviously be an example of isolation, even though it's within a classroom.
Also, like Title VI just defines the way.
Okay,
how
so like, I guess the
isolation is
question then
in
becomes
schools.
like,
There's
why
a
can't Betsy
process.
DeVos be like, oh, I don't think that's isolation. Forget it. You don't have to desegregate.
The process of Title VI, when it was created, there was like a long definition of how you see what schools are desegregated. There's like a 3-step process. First, identifying like how much racial isolation there is. There's data collection that's done on that, and the federal government has collected that data in the past to determine which schools are segregated. Second, it's can you desegregate those schools? So for example, if it's like one rural school, there's no school like within 200 miles, but it's segregated, it's going to be really hard to desegregate that. So like those probably wouldn't be, but like ones that, you know, there's a segregated school and then there's schools that are like really close to it that are also like predominantly white or predominantly black, those can be desegregated.
That makes sense. Is it the Cleveland card? It might be a black card, but one of your pieces of evidence sort of hints at like Supreme Court intervention. When has that happened in the context of state level desegregation policy?
Like when would the Supreme Court strike down?
When have they struck down
Like
the
the
state
black evidence
deseg
gives
plan?
an example of that, like the Gardendale School District, the federal government said was okay.
Well, they said the states didn't have to desegregate. It didn't prevent them from desegregating. All right.
Yes.
The 1% out 7 off training advantage. Do you want to have the time this second? Because you probably know better what I can say. But you don't have to follow along. I'm just going to keep going. So you can watch the video. Started. The whole thank you speeches thing. Similarly to Stephen and Donish, I didn't really think of anything before the round. So I'd like to thank everyone who's ever helped me in my debate career over all 4 years. It's been a super good experience. All my friends that have helped cutting cards while at home or just supported us generally. Our coaches, well, we don't really have coaches, but the people who helped us out at the TOC, like Miles, Wimsat, all the Michigan and Cal people, thanks to all of you. A special shout out to Ani Prabhu. He taught us both how to debate. Without him, we would not have been here, let alone won a round ever in our entire careers. Everything that we do is because of what he's taught us. Thanks to all the camps and lab leaders that we've talked to and generally everyone that's helped us, my family and all those people for supporting me, etc. Yeah, cool. 7 up, framers, case. Is anyone not good? First off, is topicality education is a possibility not schooling coach in formal association make of this kind of education, which is not actual possibility kind of education around restrictions on statutes. School is not distraction, very negative for limits and legal precision. Schooling justifies any abstract availability which dodges stable nightcap and faces core definitions. Next off, these states and 50 states and all and sub-federal entities should create programs to minimize segregation in primary and secondary schools in the United States and consult with education leaders in design and methods for evaluating and achieving general outcomes. Require state policymakers to study research about the local nuances of rural education, minimize intrusion into implementation of the education policy at the municipal level. It's solved better in 116 federal court education and state goes over segregation from the core limits of busing of ability to court ability in further decisions in fact segregation beyond the reach of course segregation to other practice other than intentional conduct. Next case, the intended case, segregation much children, why remedies the Supreme Court, but names all meaningful segregation remedies in federal courts, districts to be released from the responsibilities even if segregation of energy, the federal courts and this year for segregation by private choices of courts and segregation depending on review grants of all the even after barrier to enforcing ground of federal court. Incorporating rural specificity and local reforms is key. The FCNR's policy causes cascading harm to rural communities even when it dumps regulations on them. Johnson 15 policy has starts to minor education policy policy has merit creating policy, it's an opportunity to recognize what ability that outcomes reflects local movements in a diverse context, recognize the very stretching purpose outcomes design through the consult with these or reflect their things and images a role places or standardized normalized local policy making it opportunity for a second recommend any sense that self has perhaps the intent of anything of which damage a spec they did and it precludes mechanism competition, which is the foundation of precise ed policy debates and ruins that grand topic is already massively asked by us. Next up is midterms. Democrats win the midterms have it'll be close to I'll call you 14 Democrats proven fine 57% disapprove the question savings here comes through weighting down 4 points and I still know a 7-point lead of general calls and more intense deism. 6% Democratic voters with high interest of financial help and through an audience of 2010. It's not a knockout. The app flips the script. Brian 29 candidates so one maybe funding for schools Sanchez across the country that communicate Democrats with Washington on education that covered the economy and help you relate the boss of Democrats making your initiative of opposition. The Democrats will be beating the midterm president's party has lost seats because of themselves, especially vulnerable education is the party's winning issue. Weak approval ratings in Dem House constrained populism. French 1-7 impeachment is a legal proceedings political process. The combination of corruption opposition political driver president out of office. The House now may face impeachment for the millions of minds about him solves nuclear conflict. Clarion 17 Trump's like risk of embarrassment can be conflict to bring military forces to infection forces action on the Middle East or prime explode multiple world with the personalities of leaders and the location and actually the second part of response to generals often guarantee the class and how to see good nation mutual foreign nations will face technical this morning. After this performance is correction reliance in the Middle East and nuclear weapons. The crisis involving nuclear state opportunity crisis. Next up is state standing. The 50 states enrolled in sub-federal entities should desegregate elementary and secondary education in the United States. The 50 states should sue the United States federal government for full federal enforced desegregation on the grounds of sovereign preemption state standing. Based on Article 3, for the state to have standing means the active presumption or active preemption and existing under enforcement. The act is the Fed preempt and fixing under enforcement, which removes the ground for the suit. National 17, the sovereign preemption is the standing use of federal government case of the smart person, a state as source transparency on the access to that arises from the executive and enforcing federal law and Fed preempting the state law, the Constitution, validates all home states protecting the well-being standing of the full the Fed preempts state law, so states receive access to the Fed makes no law the voice has no standing to challenge the Fed has opposite supersede the state. That doctrine the counterpoint establishes spills over to strengthen overall state legislation within federal regulatory schemes, which strengthens both levels of governance and spills over Rule 16. Oh my goodness, time. Supremacy, federal law, defense, and state cooperation is implementation of the arena center to the other laws of state cooperation and that attending recognizes the state of the state challenge federal law actions and copying interest in litigating boundaries of federal authority. I would have to help clarify state saying documents outside the law limitation and facility that solves warming does mean taking 18 regulatory include federalism, the retaining state federal government research and federal versus our health markets, the safety and climate progress, litigation problem, federal actions, federal interventions were shaped by state experience, that harness state regulatory capacity, the reform for replacing post-acting person that environmental challenges of climate change relevant, and state like Christians that authority fosters stability for innovation and investing development for the risk of forcing on climate in all climate mitigation and certain under Trump also progress forming cause extinction the law 17 countries Texas version kind of and human civilization Texas are not amenable to different benefits we cannot rely on the society to develop for other sources of risk the evidence that climate change for the next risk global stability correct energy response. Next up is rural schools, federal education funding innovation box out rural schools veteran 16 half the rule Fed policies are not getting account of unique needs of rural schools goals for potential concerns from the impact of living existence and spend time rural America Fed funding innovations are concerns rural educators rural at least not benefit from Fed funding and the urban counterparts points of urban districts rural schools have not been able to count lots of great opportunities urban schools can have research for applications and show up big impact on kind of provisions requiring schools in the tree of really progress for additional difficult and rural schools where a single student performance can have a strong that causes closures Johnson and all 14 find difficult abilities to carry the sport meet the highlights and innovation requirements and a time in the next facility that have doors to be spent and biblical compliance on state rules so in attendance and majority of the placing meetings going for consolidation to be avoided but consolidation and modality rural schools are key to local economies all for and public schools improve the local economy and attract public schools are important and totally integrated with other aspects of economic development such as capital local public schools are economically advanced local economies suffer the hell that's a take populations of another investment value and spend more time with social programs economic vitality as the performance of schools quality schools can make more competitive local decline collapses food security growing in 13 towns because that's the name for services that create jobs in rural parts of the hospital finding women rural America and universal matters to nations all being the country the food abundance taken for granted urban suburban featured rural American farmers lawmakers don't get treated on American political permanent rural farmers for appointed they produce long evidence of importance Newport FBI and 12 complex and most likely filed over over 2 average said I mean covering the action more food scales with future being selling greater if you will how many states not stable regions are run short of food wholesale by the words of follow credible scenario for what a chain of resource complex study and consider for cities are like some comment for one in the Balkans experience was the team of the defense from the CIA, CSI, and the OSLA and the Feminine Figure for New York. Can I skip one of the next one? Can I skip the 6 or 7? The 7 is the politics stuff. Skip that one? All right, next up is anti-common drinking. Anti-common drinking doctrine constrains by federal power now. How you feel to be codified the people of the anti-common drinking court has held that the federal government cannot compel states and act related to permanent anti-common drinking doctrine in place to keep the federal government in check that pass the implementation. Federal education policy nullifies the class and all 16 interpretation of the anti-common drinking case will allow the federal government to overextend authority to have a government. I can say state and change most of the time far reaching the the anti-common drinking doctrine have severe repercussions in the internal policy. The federal government that doesn't know its will states will be cooperate with the federal government policy. State resistance solves extinction, but essence anti-Trump anti-environmental agenda is reading the law plan of the silver climate change access and taken by state leaders and an alternative path to 2/3 the economy, but recognized leadership states are battling carbon pollution even in the state of her one which are continuing to cut it into the climate change policy strong but the leadership of the state level maybe up to bridge the gap. The framing stuff extinction comes first. Jaworski in 18 here extinction needs a marking partners of extinction is the most crazy one of the public publics are anthropogenic risks and this include greatest big problems the lack of word for real threat you face assessment extinction all report 1 to 10 million grants it's in the academic community where keep over this like extensive risk developing your mitigation strategies require civic engagement and current sort of research research are to improve the communication of active counter plans to obviate their offense. They can't falsify intent, so improve their focus on solving structure balance better. Scenario planning, high magnitude scenarios is good and effective. Monta engineer 13 scenarios community building, identifying hypotheses, doing the world, collecting the bias, and taking the scenarios to the possible hypotheses, and I think we should change the positive policy, but design for the reliable and empirical research. The most common uses of study high concept probability, best nuclear warfare, these dimensions of rigorous specify interest, improve the study of IR solvency. Actually means that it cuts both ways. The plan's not effective at reducing inequality. It's not worth voting for a nuclear action. Skip that. Util and extinction should come first, and also debate means that conceded arguments are true. Okay, skip that last part. The case proper. They can't solve housing segregation, other residential classes, so for students live in looted and poor areas, which takes out the spillover stuff. It also turns solvency. Ross 1016 split segregation is a problem in neighborhoods. All schools are segregated because of neighborhoods are segregated. We have adopted different neighborhoods are segregated. De facto neighborhoods are segregated because of hate deliberate policies separate the races. Policies are proposed in every region. Policy never remember the cause of segregation. Trump wrecks the app versus lower courts will sue, and red states obviously comply with his agenda. Second is DeVos. 17 DeVos cut the TV rights of rights. DeVos should have not been for the laws. The also the government of rights are solid activity. May not welcome them participate in the ideology of the trust that right now be vetting. Third is counterbalancing. Hutchinson is 16 and segregation. Segregation firms will also solve the sex education of foundation sponsored schools for explosive in the product of state recommended segregation of us department has the best catastrophic step also with no relevant police and surveillance commitments of us. Also goes so. Fourth is implementation. Look at the same development and combination of discrimination. Alpha picture arguments and Bloomberg. The director for long criticized some civil rights laws around the this period to defending implement discrimination. He approves important legislation. That evidence is marked important legislation. And that was the Lopez card. Lopez card, important legislation.
Did you read the Hutchinson part?
Yes. Okay. I read everything before Lopez except for Sanchez, Starr, and politics.
Okay.
And like the war stuff, the side story. Got it?
We're taking.
Oh, you're taking
Yeah. Stop prep 9, okay. You ready?
1 second. Yeah.
Okay, status of counterplans.
Conditional status goes on the motion.
All right, net benefits to counterplan.
Net benefits to states, I think, is every dissent in one seat, right, Drew? And the circumvention stuff on case. Net benefit to state standing is it the internal one and the other dissent, or just the internal one?
Just the internal.
The net benefit to state standing is just the internal one.
Okay, state standing.
Yeah.
How does this suit procedure work?
Drew, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so the argument is that states will sue the federal government on the grounds that since the federal government has preempted state attempts at desegregation, it is the federal government, like the DOE's responsibility to enforce desegregation pursuant to Title VI, which is something you mentioned, 1AC crossings. There is a congressional directive. The states sue on the grounds that that means that the agency must desegregate.
Okay, so I'm confused why the states sue exactly. They sue because they think the federal government's overreaching.
Well,
No.
we fiat that they sue.
You
That was-
feel
that's
that
the second fight.
Second.
The 50 states should sue the United States federal government, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
But the reason why is what Drew articulated. If the Fed has already preempted state desegregation efforts, the burden is on the Fed to enforce those efforts.
There's a congressional directive that binds an agency to do it, as well as something like the Equal Protection Clause, which gives them a constitutional justification for the case.
This is a thing. This is a law that exists.
So after they sue, what happens?
Or
Just
as they win. Like courts are extremely receptive to states standing under Article 3,
All right, that's fair.
which binds the government to do that.
Yep, the anti-commandeering dissent.
Yeah.
What evidence contextual to desegregation policy in the context of anti-commandeering?
Not in the 1C, but it'll be there.
Well, to be clear, it's about the mechanism of the app, not like whether you're desegregating.
Yeah, I don't think
Okay,
like
if the
specific
mechanism of the app
education
is just like education regulation.
Right,
that's
funding
the law.
cutoff is a form of
That wasn't
commandeering.
across-
Oh, okay, so the link is like funding cutoff.
That's a component to it.
Well, we also think it's not just like funding cutoffs broadly,
Yeah.
because you can attach a new stream of if the federal government gives states more funding, and then it's like Okay.
But yeah.
If you want this, then you have to do this. That's fine. That doesn't violate anti-commentary.
Also,
Because you're
in
gonna
1AC
accept
cross-ex, you didn't give schools the option to avoid. Like you literally, the act literally commandeers schools as per 1AC cross-ex.
Well, in all cases where it's available for racial isolation, not the term of art commandeering, the rural schools just asked,
Still.
why does the plan shut down rural schools?
So our Brenner evidence indicates that it blocks out rural flexibility and results in burdensome regulation, fights over funding allocation, things like busing details that are especially nitty-gritty in the context of rural schools. The Johnson evidence says that once those schools are overburdened, closures become inevitable.
Yeah, but desegregation doesn't require it in every single instance. All those where the racial remedies are available. What gives, basically?
Well, you have FIAT desegregating elementary and secondary schools. So TOC does not get to say, oh, we actually don't desegregate all schools.
More
Importantly, the Fed defines rural
Yeah.
incorrectly, which means that argument cannot be true.
We have a really good card that's like, here's where the Fed will try to apply rural education policy, which means you can't go for that link argument or no link argument.
Sorry. Sorry. 604.
Okay, that's it. Okay. So like common theme, no one's prepared for their thank yous. I haven't either. So like just kind of do what Steven said. Thank all of the coaches that are here. They put a lot of time and effort into helping us get better at debate, off season, and at this tournament. A special thank you to Jared Zuckerman. He was our head coach, helped us throughout debate all 4 years. It's been a really important person in this activity, and especially for us. Obviously, thanks Steven. He's the best debater I know, and definitely has helped me out become a better debater, and everyone on the team as well. If I'm missing anyone, sorry. Thank opponents that we've debated. Monta, Vista, haven't debated them yet until this round, and yeah. Okay, so the order: case, framing, T, states, state standing counterplan. Then, like, I don't know if you said A-spec as a separate off, but like, I'm not going to drop it. Where do you want me to put it?
Just on T.
On T, okay. So A-spec on T. Okay. After state standing counterplan, the rural schools decide. Then anti-commandeering. Then midterms.
Then what? Yeah.
Okay. Anybody not ready? You're good to go.
We still have neighborhood segregation, which is awarded there first all cause evidence. Holly Walker evidence says that we serve as a blueprint for other targeted litigation reforms such as residential segregation. Trump directs our avenue. We get durable feet on. It doesn't rely on Trump on implementation. It's just DOJ and DOE enforcement, which allows the United States federal government to use DOJ regulations in order to have the states comply. They say DeVos also circumvents top answers about the counterbalancing argument. It's insubstantiated by any of their evidence. Brown C14 evidence and Holly Walker called evidence says that USFG advances and enforces these cases. It's empirical evidence such as the Brown v. Board of Education. When they use funding to enforce policy, they say Trump enforcement fails us. Also, they talk about any other argument that they there can see the legal evidence that segregation loves education contributed to hundreds of thousands of deaths, which has to outweigh the just as a framing page. Extinction doesn't come first versus otherwise because it's a moral obligation. The lives are prematurely ended by racism, and it's a moral consideration. Extinction first only matters if they win. The probability of the disadvantage is extremely high. Code 13 says you should multiply the probability of their turtling against itself to get a very low risk of a disadvantage. They can see the 1% doctrine, which is a masculine evidence that counterpoint stuff will be answered on the counterpoint. Proper high magnitude doesn't come first. Jackson evidence says that creates a threat construction that ultimately deprioritizes that or impacts the songs says cut both ways. Always put on the disside util first if I didn't have any warrant and resistance first answers at T. We made education week 14. Desegregation plans made a written action decision on state sessions. Internal students have a rigorous versus improving the quality of classroom material. Education is a total solution to gender living 96. Education is the content of the total solution matches the classroom. If I love the human phenomenon with the people, a classroom here director or works with the people to directly influence the facility or efforts and director is the person who influence the policy structure of the school system. Prefer it over limits to make every debate about STEM, CD, or social studies, students, education, offense, background, always loses states campus of students are impacted limits of it or limit for limit state if it's not predictable. There's no limits differential judging and limited to school choice or reasonability. We need precise interpretation of what kind of marginally better one avoids clash rather than setting a functional limit. A-spec counter interpretation. We only have to specify what's just the resolution forces to any other standards and arbitrary tool to limit the number of cases taking out flexibility and some information post transferable skill. The specificity rewards chief trust the arguments that prevent substantive class disclosure and cross-like checks, cross-like reasonability. States. The counterline is a voting issue. Our interpretations that you shouldn't allow the negative theater out of literature-based solvency deficit solves are often says key to fairness and topic education, fosters and innovation. Otherwise, all aspirations of the market for effective word conditionality, the voting issues, good suicide, a time devising such good because abstract decision making encourages lazy next and advocacy. So it's permutation. Do both. Logic proves the counterline isn't competitive. The role of the judges to be the USFC no control over the state's solvency deficits versus strike down. Absent federal action, Supreme Court will declare lower load decisions null and void because the failure to change the ruling plaintiff capabilities. Federal government is uniquely capable of winning desegregation lawsuits as highly working enforcing capacity. All three branches of federal government are necessary for enforcing the outcomes of the order, including an overturning of Milliken. The state has spent their way out of true integration. Bowen 17. State courts interpret rights of million. They can effectively refuse to consider the question of educational quality at all. Not all states are willing to address structural problems in education, given the growing federal support for school choice and undertime use of education potential. Experience with interpreting and enforcing statutory and constitutional law finding federal funding for public education security would see as soon as states become the local districts in the meaningful way. States don't have the resources to enforce. Robinson 15 court decisions have documented states and emphasis the risk of capacity to address the full scope of these disparities. State autonomy over education plays a significant influence role in undermining federal reform. It's only the federal government with the capacity insufficient incentive to lead the national effort and links in the net benefit is still symbolic of the ass politics links to midterms because it's the same down ballot people will be voting for part of the people will be voting across party lines. State standing counterpoint. Permutation do both. Permutation do the counterpoint cross-line theory and cross-line the solvency deficit. The federal government is not going to hear the suits and state coercion is key. We need to force the states to do the act and enforce it. That's the only historical example is on our side. That's all I want. But it's federal government is key. Federal government enforcement is key. Post 17. Brown has been interpreted to give the federal government power to intervene in the case of legally sanctioned discrimination unlike segregation. Brown mandates segregation give the legal president or equal access to education. Only we solve spillovers versus legal blueprint persons, mental health facilities, etc. States can't solve there's a serious question about the public comment at the time when the federal government trying to support the down the way out of favor of cold over the natural gas and renewable Republican Party publicly global warming hoax the climate natural phenomena denial is a big problem when it comes to community which is a thing for Republican states where political leaders legally cooperative federalism is key to decrease market models of education. Song with 17. The market model of education believes that make a manufacturing model of teaching business model of public education only needed to overcome poverty, racial discrimination, market starving. After taking the original promise of social coding policies and neutral the school, government regarded segregation efforts for adult choice has the potential to perpetuate racial hierarchies of parents make a representation of self-segregated stereotypes market model encourage leads to parents to be martial actors that parents need to choose their schools with the racial profile matching their own. Federalism has thus wrongly shifted to create possibility for exacerbating racial pathways, educational inequalities. Federalism in the United States were forged as a mechanism for accompanying slavery, facilitating resistance to racial property adoption of federal and public education. Put on the path for achieving equality again. Rural schools is that.
Well, also say that like the federal government won't cure
The
the
federal
state
government
suits.
won't cure the state suits. That was the first sentence. You're right. Rural schools.
After some required funding, their evidence is talking about cross-like checks. We didn't say we require desegregation in their area because racial isolation remedies would be impossible. All causes of rural area food production, demographic uses, jobs, economy, etc. No impact. NATO is facing global precision agriculture market. To both the area, 1 of 14% farmers facing pressure maximizing production for precision farm technology, a lot more effective benefit. Optimization of inputs like seed, irrigation, and fertilizers. No food or water impact marker at all 15. Across all 200 week insignificant effort for domestic food production. All models control population, public history, companies around models with agriculture, defense, the additional control GP per capita. As this one is something consistent of corruption of power between agricultural permits and political violence for civil conflict and social rights that generate similar predictions. Anti-commandeering this had no spillover. Robinson 15 Yale law professor group with argument of federalism theory shows you and then a single theory for allocation because there are many federalisms, not one. Some put 17 crossfire that from the counterplan and they use an outdated model of federalism. It doesn't exist now because the federal government has the capacity to desegregate. The midterms is that Trump is not getting global populism and hinges on a variety of factors evolving over the decades. Barack 17 the populist with is not a matter of specific events, but the figures of Trump, this populism with the progressive social transformation over decades, making a party diversity, mediation, democratic academic cultural transformation, populism, Trumpism, destroy credibility, 16 Trumpism, even taking the steps that searches on foreign affairs must go over the decisions as a way to maintain the use to defend our ally trust, plus promote trade department positions hardly hard to isolation look. They have read a thumb for their links about school choice and funding proves more important issues than the plan. Healthcare comes second. Senate Republicans looking for to tie the Democrats to single pair the target 10 Democrats for re-election to rights basis too. Soon, Shapiro 18 election returns are unknowable in a year in advance. Premature concerning police of filler interest with running to turn us and further few hints Republicans went back to the House 2006. Many filler with the Democratic Party voters contrary what you know their own intentions today. Black Swan Scott 18. You can try to cut across the political much you can get your another candidate, but there's very things you can do. You cannot anticipate dangerous international crisis, natural disaster, or Black Swan as always a risk experimental reward. So the party with the more hawkish reputation usually benefits down, so will lose in both the House and the Senate. Labro 18. And the economy they'll take, often Democrats are having a problem with obtaining the GOP tax notice is bad. Movable way of tax political polls are funny good recovering efforts to Democrats are defending seats as states that Trump carried Democrats against blaming these 24 votes are 19 in the House of Democrats we need to win all 19 to pick up those other seats. Democrats are defending 26 seats compared to Republicans who are only defending 8. Republicans are going to do better than expected. And gerrymandering companies in geography, thumb cone 17 after 2012 Democrats won the last popular vote but fell 17 short gerrymandering this week. The GOP has to change the routine as a result of reigning issues still the Republican Democrats likely to gain 12 seats. Republicans retain the House by margin of gerrymandering and companies in geography whether House Republicans could respond to the so-called wave election corruption and ballot manipulation. Heritage 17 Trump is subject to Vice Chairman Conrad referred to the king of voter suppression and to disenfranchise voters when he required persons as next ask voters say information access and numbers and birth and party affiliations.
Did you read the Sunquist card and anti-communism?
It's the same card as the state standing counterpoint.
Okay, cool. You good?
Yeah.
Framing is the cool defending consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. If we win the plan causes a different type of structural violence, and you win that you solve for structural violence, how do we evaluate that?
Like just debating impact calc.
Okay,
like
just
which
debating impact
instance
calc.
of
That
solving
sounds
what's
fantastic.
always.
The state's counterpoint, name a single case where SCOTUS told the states they couldn't desegregate.
Like Milliken v. Bradley and parents.
That was not SCOTUS telling the states they couldn't desegregate. That was the
Yeah,
states
that was-
suing not to desegregate.
No, that was the ruling in that case. Both of them were that voluntary
Okay,
immigration plans by
so
states are not allowed.
You will stake the strike down debate on Milliken v. Bradley struck down
And
state
parents involved.
desegregation. What?
And parents involved. That's
And
another
parents
Supreme Court
involved?
case.
Neither of those are about state. Okay, so you'll stake it on this example. That sounds good.
I like
Um,
to take it. We have
Your
all
card
these
tag
steps.
states spin their way out of integration. This evidence says that state courts don't want to integrate, and so they'll use legal proceedings to get out of it. Account upon fiat that they do. How is it a
They
deficit?
fiat that they might integrate, but they don't fiat like what measures they take to integrate or how their enforcement
Wait,
mechanism is put in
That's like
place.
saying the app doesn't get a fiat how you enforce. Is that the standard?
Well, like we have read qualified evidence about the
We've read
enforcement
evidence saying how the
mechanism
states
of the app.
how the states
No,
would
you have
enforce
said that
counterpoint.
states can do it without reading any evidence about how they enforce it.
We've read recommending state enforcement mechanisms. Is that
You've
just
read
that sufficient?
evidence recommending the states to do it.
You read recommending? Yeah. The plaintiff capability stuff.
That's the evidence.
Why is plaintiff suing necessary if we win like the top level solvency plan and the counterpoint literally desegregates? Like, what's the impact of this deficit?
There's a spillover deficit. The plaintiffs that are as a result of federal government litigation are able to spark a public dialogue in federal courts about the value of integration, the value of talking about.
Why doesn't that dialogue still occur in state courts?
Because the federal courts are a much larger atmosphere and can spur broader change.
Well,
beyond
but a
state
state court
courts.
ruling, as per the counterpoint, is still binding across the country. Like, there's not a distinction because there's not an alternative ruling. So why does that differential matter?
Sure, our evidence is pretty specific to why federal courts are key because the nation's top has to set the tone of why racial immigration is good.
Okay. The theory stuff can't get at a literature-based solvency deficit. What is a literature-based deficit?
Like all of our evidence that describes states not having resources, why
So,
states won't be able to force it.
Any
is a
app
literature-based
that has a
solvency
card saying why the state's counterpoint can't solve, the negative cannot be out of that
deficit.
card.
No, like it obviously depends on the quality of the evidence, what the general
So
consensus. of
what's the
is.
bright line for what quantifies as a literature-based solvency deficit? Seems kind of vacuous.
I mean, like, no, I don't know how to explain a bright line, but
You
we
kind of
have
have to.
pretty.
Theory.
Not really. The argument that we're making is that we have very qualified and very detailed evidence describing the
So,
process of how
basically,
desegregation has happened
We
in
have
the past.
qualified solvency
how it happens in the
deficits, but
future,
instead of
etc.
reading them as deficits, they mean you don't get to read the counterpoint.
Sorry, I didn't catch
So
that.
basically, it's,
our
we have
argument is
qual-
that we have deficits. If those deficits don't matter, like the Bowman evidence, because you say you just simply fiat
Well,
that states
that's because
will
the
follow
deficits
on,
you're
then-
reading are like states won't do it. States historically haven't done it.
I
We obviously get a
disagree.
fiat
The
deficit.
That's not
evidence
true.
is a description of how states interpret the law.
All right, 10 minutes.
Stop, Rob.
7.
Hotspot? Yeah. It's called Raphael. Okay. Oh yeah, speech. So, debate has kind of been a wild ride, but I really enjoyed it. I want to thank my parents. They've had unconditional support. They don't really understand why I talk fast or anything, but they kind of just put up with everything I do. They're willing to support me, like going to tournaments halfway across the country, and I don't think I really show how much I appreciate all of that support. I want to thank like all of the people we debated this year. Some of my friends in debate are definitely the best friends I have, and I have the best discussions with them. Blue Valley, you all are amazing. It's great that we finally got to debate you. I also want to echo what Raphael said and thank Ani specifically because we literally would not debate had it not been for him, and you really made it, both of us, what we are today. I also want to thank Miles, other people who helped us at various times throughout the tournament. It's been great having you here, and it's been a lot of help.
And finally, Raphael. I wouldn't want to have done it with anyone else. But I'm going to wreck you next year. Okay. So the order states the rural DA, the framing page, and the case. I might switch the order if it wants to, but I'll sound toast.
I'm sorry, can you read it one more time?
States the rural DA, framing, and the case. Because I need to.
States rural school case page?
Yep.
Framing before case.
Are we good?
The counterplans of the state reform starting and overcomes local resistance by beyond through legal barriers only. Our elements both restrictive and comparative, which is a filter. The one here has the answer for sufficiently the app cannot solve the structural balance, the logical implication that we should maximize it to a degree, otherwise not benefit and risk of certain case outweighs the theory stuff that'll be in the winner of the permutation. And Burn combines a counterplan with onerous specific regulations to undermine rule schools and both the after the perfectly ritual forcing the rule of policy of the control policy, include federal principles, state policy, for public policies, focus on rural education, for at least volume for rules, include state testing, accountability, everything, and the value which requires that as related to rural activities, supposed to be the second percent of the house, just stress the funding swinging by the district number of students for use by disproportionately due to small for city low improvements of your minutes regards to for the funding policy reverse research that's required rule just to make different choice about versus spending. It is competitive. The role of the judge to make an opinion on the desirability of claim you are not the USFG but a citizen. Their intro is illogical. The counterplan is obviously competitive because it severs out of the United States federal government, which is in the plain text the solvency deficits, no strike down, a durable field solve this key to equitable ground research, be empiric states that taking desegregation. Their only example is the federal government ruling that the Constitution does not force states to desegregate, not overruling state desegregation plans. So strike down Hilburn 17th. This is their one EC author, and the title of the article is Restoring the Promise of Brown Using State Constitutional Law to Challenge Desegregation. Hilburn 17th U.S. Constitution of Mental Right to Education State Constitution provided you went for adequate protection of the state line with the Supreme Court state constitution for I don't think that you for every constitutional principle of the English community state rules of education like the previous case but you the state finance the court and resolve the entire state even it goes to federal courts. The Erie Doctrine means that those federal courts defer to and interpret state laws. Smith and 15 if you federal courts and interpret the action like the law state which is the first action for the court and should take a law the first source of law federal court by some plan to state law. They say the federal government is capable of putting lawsuits. There's no impact of this deficit in the 2EC or even in the 1EC. The counterplan fiat states desegregate, so there's nothing to sue for if we run our compliance arguments. Every solvency argument is starting to mention DA to the act because it proves they can't solve state court suits because local courts will interfere with the enforcement argument. This capacity is warrantless. It ignores fiating the state take action. All of our evidence is both comparative and better than theirs, which just assumes state inaction, which the counterplan is obviously rendered. Here's a rack of parts that impact her in this. Well, in 16, can't want to be a school that lets her give us a little bit of what you do, federal implementation fails. Columberg at 17. Rose School University look beyond the federal government. They the funds for schools that enforce insurance for promotion and sector of the time for support. The federal courts will foil enforcement. Columberg at 17. Federal courts have an effect to these out of 10. Second rule of segregation by listed country where segregation was a sexual course of constitutional rights education course. How about the at the age of Trump? The state spin out argument. Bowman says that states narrowly interpret the RT in the status quo. The counterplan is a remedy. Reading cards and saying inaction out is not a deficit to the state's counterplan. It's just inability to answer it. The next argument that states don't have resources. This card is Robinson's proposal about funding equity and a right to education. It's not about desegregation, and the 1AR spin can be answered by new to an argument. So last argument links in FNV. It was not midterms. They didn't make it links to food argument, so it can't be new in the 1AR. Independently, the counterplan solves it by incorporating local context and consulting local experts, but the app overwhelms the counterplan's consultation because it sends a signal that the Fed is willing to intervene and impose crushing mandates on schools, the rural DA proper. Food crisis or past route to extinction because of supply volatility and escalating famines for first time frame because voting neglects you live to fight another day long-term effects inherently uncertain check by intervening actors. The client causes state clock and festering research conflict with drawing great powers like Russia and China. Here's where I'm with Dollar in 17. American proportion of food security is operating concept of family looking at the 20 billion people also public send more consequences of mass migration, search and blood soil, national supposed to access to the EU, extinction, Fisher in 15, Europe to look at literally World War II 1. I think the literally convinced some of the Eastern Australia to become the builders of nations are treating this as political, and also the all of the players more thinkable causes to not be higher than English planet. It turns case exacerbates structural balance domestically and undercuts benefits for food families and lunch programs at schools, and so does the link makes compliance impossible because it saps resources necessary for busing. Also creates backlash to black kids in rural communities who will blame them for school consolidation, which is our link argument. The first argument is no link. I'll do the link. You have to have states rural schools. 1, compliance. The costs are astronomical for filling in basic information requests for federal statutes. That's what Johnson Evans. 2 is durability. Triple fiat magnifies the link because the regulations the app creates are uncompromising and can't change to react to new conditions. Only the counterplan bakes in flexibility to drop stringency to
economic conditions. Otherwise, even slight recessions combined with the app blow the schools out of water. The plans requirement undermines rural schools. Looking to verdict in 70 public schools remind how these rural schools collect majority of the reasons for the way they're talking about having segregation. Aspiration metropolitan under the study compared to metropolitan. There was like variation pattern of the parts of the country for the reason there's so much variation in which like the companies are very present that values are disproportionately found in rural areas. One size fits all federal policies are net negative. Johnson 15 rural schools are different appreciating non-rural schools that are organizations with federal policies right school improvement one side. Fits all versus resulting in policies that are effective and harmful rural communities. If your national policies side for rural schools and failing to various resulting in vertical working against the primary policy goals. Here's the evidence for the claim that I was making. One is the cross-checks that the Fed defines rural incorrectly. Down on 16, rural regions are inside either the schools you can see is a very different rural federal agencies that the U.S. Census classifiable charters being located inside the urban clusters. U.S. Office of Management simple classification dichotomous average can make really same homogeneous rural areas share some minorities, but the problem lies in the definition more than just usually seeing it as social practices in the rural areas heterogeneity. So certain their part generalized to rural conditions are wrong. The next argument I'll do the internal link debate because it obviates it. School closures and burdens from Fred Rex hollow out local economies. Businesses don't want to invest. That causes rural economic decline, which jacks lack investment and no ancillary industries makes farms go under. That's during rural schools are the key to determine overwhelms and solves all kinds of taking it. And some people should close schools involving rural community schools involving schools and specific places for the curriculum that complete those receives the generation responsible for sustainability. Schools are the community's largest employer offering well-paying jobs that disorder that dissipate the position ratio top rural communities from schools are system higher on values and low quality new business are attractive to towns as well as the system expanding employment increasing access to rural healthcare promoting conservation rural land point without closure the amount of little without school there's no community. The BW evidence this card is surely highlighted just says that there are precision farming tech does not say that it's on a large scale. It does not say that it solves food insecurity. It doesn't assume the link which causes rural farms to massively close and they have no carded link defense. So you should assume a very, very, very high magnitude. The next argument that there's no food or water wars. This is the answer to the overview. Our argument actually does matter in the context of time frame because it's about Russia posturing and ISIS rise now, which what didn't happen in 2015. Or evidence about U.S. food security or U.S. food supply being key assumes those and says that they're converging threats that only the U.S. can stabilize. The framing page. Racism is not a D-roll. It's obviously bad, but extinction concerns consequential is best because maximizing the greatest value of life is the most ethical frame for policy making. We will win a significant risk of the dissent, which answers the next argument. But the long internal link chain stuff is tautological. You should refer to specificity, technical debating always generic claims about long internal link chains to make them prove why the dissent is improbable. There's also no bright line. There's no quantifiable difference. For example, the absence of rely on a shoddy internal link chain that federal agencies desegregate, which causes people to, at the local level in schools like Alabama, to comply. And if they don't, backlash in a way that harms blackheads. All of those apply to their critique of complexity theory just as much. High magnitude argument. The assumption behind this argument is tautological and still relies on util as a calculus for policymaking. It's that we thought that we took policies we thought were utilitarianism, but ended up hurting more people, i.e. the Iraq War. But the basic frame for evaluating whether things like the Iraq War are ethical is whether or not those policies harm more people, and they have said yes, so it was unethical, which proves that they agree with their basic frame for policymaking. Extinction logic is not a national security con. It assumes that dissent is a false trick, which is untrue when you've read two pieces of impact defense, no link defense, no uniqueness defense, no internal link defense. Every scenario is not securitized. I'm not going to read that extra part. The case problem. Neighborhood segregation dump, that's a raw state evidence. They've never been remedying policies like redlining me that even if they increase access, endemic poverty, and housing discrimination, limit social mobility in the wrong loan. Brooklyn is an extremely weak argument. They have no evidence to substantiate this in the context of our specific laws, because specifically the plan does not change core precedent for their solvency evidence, so there's no basis for litigation to spill over to other issues. The advocates circumvented. 1. Quinlan, the DOE will actively ignore complaints because the Boston instructed the OCR to do so. Even staff are untrustworthy, which means there's a high likelihood they dismiss claims. This was not about Trump. The 2EC just missed the ball, and if they win their argument about literature-based deficits being bad, they cannot fiat pass this argument. I'm not going to go for the voucher stuff. I'm going to go back to the food DA and read another card. Strong public schools are key to rural economic health. RC 15. Public sharing the linchpin rural community involvement education from the starting point of the universal change public schools. Many small towns and families are covered by short linking communities. All really can't say single school system and strong public schools is one of the largest employers. Holly Walker. That's fine. Also, we don't need to win the full magnitude of the link, just like consolidation instead of closures causes hard. So the card I didn't read was door. Sanchez.
Are you cleaning correctly? That is correct.
Okay.
You know, okay.
452.
Okay, you good?
Yeah.
What does the counterplan do differently to rural schools that's like distinct from DF?
So the counterplan does things like joint stakeholder involvement between states and rural schools. It also consults with those schools in and of itself. So if desegregation is just like would collapse the school, it would not happen. If it would be too burdensome, they wouldn't be able to implement it effectively because resource shortages, et cetera, whatnot, it wouldn't happen.
Okay,
Our
so
evidence also says that the process of consultation, the 1NC evidence, says that the process of consultation will repeatedly happen in the future, which allows states and rural schools to create a balance that allows them to maintain stability.
okay, consultation allows balance and stability. Okay, the link to the dissent itself in cross-ex, we specified the mechanism of the AF as not necessarily having to desegregate rural schools that can't be integrated.
And
How is
so,
there still a link?
because your answer to that was like, if there is a school that doesn't have like, if there's one school in like a 200-mile radius, which like, where does that exist? They don't have to
Rural
desegregate.
schools.
More importantly, our evidence is fantastic on the question of the fact the federal government ignores those needs of rural schools. So all of your arguments
What
about
evidence says that?
the
That they will desegregate rural schools as a result of the plan.
so if you want that argument, I think it starts with an A. Sorry. The rural is defined incorrectly, Card. The IDONIA 16 evidence is about how rural is defined extremely narrowly. So when federal agencies try to provide benefits like writ large rural schools, that very rarely applies, and most schools are forced to desegregate.
Okay, yeah, like what line of that card says that?
Like, it says what?
It says exactly what you just said. Like, I know you're like trying to re-explain it.
This
but, like, what part of the
exclusion
card says
constitutes to the very definition of rural. Federal agencies use this definition. The U.S. Census classifies all territories as being located in or outside urban clusters. And then it says, this dichotomous definition can make rural areas seem homogeneous. Rural areas do share similarities. The problem lies in extending the definition of rural to more than just a geographic concept, and seeing it as social practices and structures.
Okay, so why is that definition not also applied to the states?
Because it's consultation. So the distinction is that the states don't see schools upon their census classification and then apply regs that way. It consults with the schools and then determines if the policies.
Okay, that's fine. The no strike down card you read on the state's counterplan. Hilbert 17 is talking about a right to education, not desegregation. How does it apply?
No, it says that state constitutions have rights to education, which means that litigants, or I guess in this case, the counterplan, can enforce a state desegregation plan.
Where does it at all talk about desegregation?
The title of the article is using state constitutional law to challenge school segregation.
Its point is that since states have an RTE, it's easier to win suits guaranteeing desegregation in state courts. The 1 hour set. The order is midterms, state standing, T education, anti-communism.
By the way, we're putting theory on like state standing just for.
Yeah, education is probably right there.
One more time.
Midterms, state standing, T education, anti-commandeering.
Slower. Midterms.
Midterms, state standing, T education, anti-commandeering. Do you both have a? Anyone not good? Midterms not going for no conceded too far away. The F doesn't affect any cross steps or new mirror neutron or response to the state standing. Not going for it. They can't advocate any permutations. I'll do theory here. 50 safety it's good to judge the policymaker, which means that for the best policy option, their term is awful because it's possible to tell what is a lit-based solve test. It becomes good like the end. Let's the Tracy locked and then convey the status quo. It also punishes any debt that you just make up or find from the internet because it's impossible to quantify if it's good or bad enough. BA is the lit-based state which is the core controversy and it's based on the lit or kind of bills for like research because fed keywords running the topic, which straight terms their interpretation. B is functional limit states as a lifeblood of negatives affect human education in hundreds of tiny ways through hundreds of mechanisms. How it becomes unmanageable. As enforcing aspects of a well-designed fed keyboard and their model incentivized Russian generics over specific crops. C is education also increase part of the education policy action increase BVA education policy. We're building the social workers that increase for the government education so I will come back in the scholarship report for the solutions and controlling economic considerations ability to people less involved in education. Defer neg. There are zero decides an alternative process count plans predict the argument and not the team conditionality. We get what we did. A is critical thinking. It forces a smart choosy response to application to information. B is negative ideological flex condos team topic with zero decide ground allowing for rigorous testing to source competitive equity. Industrial J education. C is loss for decision making the judgment of the best policy option. Anything else isn't real world turns it off and protect the argument. Add on firms Tracy choice check. W skews inevitable because the speed procedurals and this has logic straight turns argument responsibility and adequacy flex control the better internal link their offense since it tests the plan. Anything else reason reject the argument. Other team gets plan because of crimes. Good. And T is super flippy. If the one error is like you drop this one standard, you drop this intro, we get each in our answers. Okay. T. Education refers to the process of curricular learning. Top class must alter that preferred definitions from the superior court. You don't meet ed because it affects topicality at best. It's a voting issue for disheartening to counter competition. Jungle Elizabeth first. You don't meet it because the app includes outside of the school, like the neighborhood, those cross-sects, and their claim that litigants going elsewhere, which is a fiat mandate of the plan's enforcement. Second is it justifies chance of substantial schooling apps like vaccines, military buses, lunches, and pending power. A smaller topic incentivizes richer, in-depth debate focus on case-specific issues and critical advantages. And this has the impact of testing huge and then forceful purpose means one of the activity school is that describes the institutions including communities with the living quarters, books, ranking because they spirit force ATM instead of the schools when revolving around schooling is an education that leaves the imprecise creation for the kind of Slavic like the choice of definitions, but because it makes effort addressing education school allows towards high different definitions, overlimiting caseless disproves prison zero tolerance to training, CTE commons testing refugees, natives, and anti-LGBT curricula are all within inside the classroom and effective process of learning. Those apps are actually safe because they have unique warrants based on actor jurisdiction or modeling arguments. A small topic is better because it encourages fewer dissenting count plans instead of running gun shotgun strategies, engaging in still possibly sure negative after ground above applies after advantages, expertise, state budgets, and core modeling. All B states, MEs, OER, native maps will prove that deficits can exist. Functional limits doesn't solve it because it's only a few words that mean anything. Reasonability, baggage, arbitrary forces, judge and mention the above offense provably are reasonable regardless. The dishad, the 2AC has conceded a disadvantage. They have read one card that says literally nothing about the 1 and C or anti-commentary. In that way, state resistance to Trump's agenda solves a litany of extinction threats like activism, climate change, and lash out, warning explanatory extinction level, but actually now it's first global fall on to diverse impacts. It turns the case. A is it destroys compliance because the link alone encourages states to be not a solvency. B is racism, strong state autonomy, key resistant, and fight Trump policies like the wall. C is it actually equal education, green for two kind of centralized standards on schools to reduce side effects of reform, turning the norms, also cheated, hated reform, which I think is little change public schools are supporting reform through formalization, centralized reform, setting water down, and game implementation, formalizing policies that are one size fits on this spillover debate. It's functionally dropped. New education policy legally nullifies the anti-community doctrine, which results in codified federal intervention in other areas. The Robinson card is not responsive because it doesn't assume the anti-community stuff, which our cost evidence says the Fed will use as a strategic justification to apply education precedents in other areas. It's unique in the context of the app because of how dogmatic they've been about enforcement and being so brutal to states and when it's cross it results in the application blocking the number of this which is probably on education national power is probably constituting dangerous as the head of the given power like saying exceeds the station the executive could ideally achieve the IPNs and the finances the power to actually could achieve the negotiated legislation and the case for their under renovation of the statutory of authority from the balance of the constitution to European case from the federal Congress the executive. It will trigger federal pressure blocking 15 elections rule for education but also for balance of power political politicians that call for executive financial waivers and other areas of the financial waiver power is unconstitutional absent legislative authority. Executive enforcement magnifies only blocking 15 allowing the second control states would use other violations of acts to be built mention the dog education policies that had failed in conversation or truth would be that sectors and really I think the courts can policies was beyond constitutional authority. These courts or the second sciences that long power we would use this no mechanism congress and opposition of policy waiving conditions is a market only for education but also the entire province to see consortium more administrative than ever before. These courts are not justified you wanting our answers because they're only responsive to the TOC argument. The Sunquist card about federalism being racist is relevant because the case turns the count but it's also not in the context of this said the states can't solve card from the state standing count plan it doesn't apply because it doesn't assume other scenarios for extinction. That was the impact of midterms. It wasn't just populism but also Trump's broadly. But states do solve extinction global warming. Senate 17D climate change regulation that's the front of the income to the word denying climate change is official policy government that which is that also scientific consensus and also world government the action works with the new environmental have to give up states acting in the original fossil fuels experimental energy and make source that's why I can get jobs that carbon research kind of when allowed from sovereign nation market card sovereign nation it solves if it's in 17 federal systems are well flexible and very kind of conflict when it comes to global warming, and federal to Asia, California, Canada, sleep out. It's America's best hooked up. Although I believe had an advantage because it's higher than I can't replace the manufacturing. The evidence is market manufacturing.
Okay, 452. Stop 122.
122.
122.
Only have a couple parts in this one.
Or there's separate docs in this one. There's just space.
Okay.
Okay, the order's case, framing, T, states, anti-commandeering, and I'm just gonna do this again afterwards. Rural schools.
Wait, can you say that again?
Yeah. Case, framing, T, states, anti-commandeering rural schools. All right, is anybody not ready? Spillover solves neighborhood segregation. This Holly Walker legal precedent is sufficient to cause person mental facilities, etc. Improvement evidence isn't substantiated by a card they read in the law. Obviously, enforcement mechanism overcomes. Trump is a distinction. 2EC came with herbs with the boss. Evidence is that it's able to fiat past it will not go for theory, so it's sufficient to solve. All of the other circumvention arguments are overcome. Framing racism should come before their extinction first impact calculus. It's reductive as per the mescal evidence because every action has 1% risk of causing extinction, which means any action becomes impossible under their framework. Their metal internal link sheet doesn't apply to the affirmative because you rely on probabilistic scenarios. They happen to the specific case debating where consequences, predictions, etc. don't matter in our condition or specific disadvantages. Topicality, we meet education with curriculum. Evidence goes completely drops. Drives curriculum as something that would be cheap under desegregation. Affects topicality means that every F would be FX TV or every F that funds at least because it would rely on that process in the first place. Showing and look at evidence is better than the cards that they have even if from 66 because it at least spreads a precedent that's able to solve a lot of their limits argument because they have to be tied to schools directly. Vaccines, military, etc. wouldn't be common. For evidence relies on 3 separate definitions, which means that link terms are precision as well as limits argument because you could use it to justify any inclusion within the case law specifically, which answers all of their case law arguments. Obviously, all of these affirmatives will lose to the state's counterclaim. They gave a really long case list, but none of the arguments are explained. How did any of those beat states? And if you can't explain it, you should allow the tutoring articulation of all of the arguments. All of the reasons why limits are good are turned via the state-based argument because the topic wouldn't be functional for the affirmative in the first place. Reasonability, it's inherently hard to generate offense or key, which means you shouldn't defer to their interpretation in the first place. So also as information intervention or any of the other one in our arguments, we obviously get new to their explanation because the one there was super light on topicality. States. The fiating legal argument at the top obviously won't solve the solvency deficit I'm doing for sufficiency. You can't apply to racism or any of the other stuff. Term do both. They're not competitive with the other disadvantage about rural schools because it includes the consultation mechanism, which is sufficient to solve. Not competitive with the other disadvantage because we like cooperative federalism, which they conceded an analytic about in the 2EC is key to the other arguments. Spillover deficit. Holly Walker says that only the client can lead to broader desegregation efforts. They have no 2 response to this. Only plaintiff capabilities are sufficient. The Frankenberg and Taylor evidence also supports this thesis and also solves a strikedown where terms involve this argument they haven't come to grips with. The argument they make to answer it is Smith and Hooper, which is about the right to education rating of it. Smith 15 evidence doesn't assume the regulatory capacity of the fan. Fiat and desegregation obviously can't overcome the enforcement deficit because the plan doesn't get access to literally illegal fiat either. They say circumvention applies to the affirmative, but our fiated mechanism is able to solve the case to proves the wall. Evidence is hopeful, but priced into our overall scenario. The calendar 17 evidence assumes current inaction, but obviously the line is sufficient to reverse all of that. Only Fed action can reverse perceptions of nationwide acceptance of racism. Key to spill over Robinson 15 the nations that would need to initiate after conversation wide United States no later holidays for dedication of our government comes for the affirmative action American sedition. This is a conversation where parts of our government leadership explain the recent nation here for education models and award to research is working with the agenda setting service one of the federal government education agenda the anti-commandeering disaster. No transcase or terminal impact to work done in the one and R besides a concession, which means if we win the racism or racism obviously comes before any of it. No risk of a link. Cross-apply the evidence from anti-commandeering, cross-apply the evidence from the counterplan says that segregation is clearly only a federal issue, which means that it can't spill down. So it works the Gherkin evidence, which says there's no overall flow over all of the cards they've read or don't rely on the same thesis of anti-commandeering, but rather distinctions between it, which obviously should be thumbed via title, non-regulation. Other things that rely on conditional funding, which is insufficient, specifically black, should thumb the disadvantage because it relies on that thesis. All of the states warning evidence was written in the wake of some kind of regulatory efforts with Trump, but don't assume the actual capacity to what kind of efforts do they have? What would they even do? States aren't sufficient to cause the global crisis of climate change. Rural schools disaster. Food crisis don't cause extinction. Only the BUAC evidence in multiple studies correlates it with previous extinction and says they're not sufficient to still up. Cancer cases continue the ability to include all of their words about school quality writ large, but not desegregation specifically. The link can't work in case because it's continuing on the same link argument. It's also disproven because it's just about school quality as well. No link. The plan doesn't have to be about all segregated schools, but only with the racial isolation occurs. The Holly Walker evidence describes the plan in this manner in the 1AC durability argument. There's a link in this reading of the F specifically. The Johnson evidence doesn't assume this either. All of the evidence describes the federal government is either not the context of desegregation or doesn't assume not busing to other areas, even if it provides a strain. That strain isn't sufficient to offset totality of the economy. The alternative causes arguments, albeit not parted, are logical and supported by their own evidence. As there's other economic issues hollowing out of populations, etc. All of those things are not just contingent on education, but important even if education is one of the key factors for them overall. All of the impact events evidence they were at the end again. Food and water shortages is short and under highlighted. You should prefer analytical studies. There's no threshold for the the terminal impact supported via the all causes argument, there's no risk that funding is sufficient to solve. Obviously, if the counterline is capable of resolving any of this disadvantage, then the permutation is either topicality or counter-interpretation, in case that becomes a thing, is that education is a total school system. I know that was last time. Anything else? Okay.
We have 7 minutes.
Okay. Order will be the roll disad. The anti-commandeering DA. The state's counterplan. The framing page. And the case. Are we good? Food conflicts go nuclear because of volatility and famine, freeze, diversity, pressure. It's the most probable scenario because conversion crisis will fracture the EU and embolden Russia. It happens fast because the droughts in Russia whose nukes are on here triggered. That's a Fisher. It's only the U.S. supply stabilizes gold prices and acts as a conflict dampener because exports prevent insurgency groups from creating structural instability in the Middle East. That's a dull argument. They conceded all of these arguments about the immediacy of the status quo going to escalate, which obvious that Buhag evidence, which is an analytical study about past food conflicts, which doesn't assume or specificity about the status quo. It turns the case on two levels. One, the link overburdens means no compliance. Most schools won't be able to desegregate. They don't have the money to do things like busing. Second, and this is more important, rural consolidation or closure means that white families blame black kids for their schools closing in the first place. It turns the benefits of social contact theory, which is the entire reason that desegregation is good. This means the link alone is sufficient to win because it turns the entire academic linear does not answer. You should find the debate through a low threshold for the link. Even consolidation, sans closures, decreases the quality of rural education. Two pieces of 2NC evidence says that the ultimate determination of long-term sustainability, which accesses or impacts scenario. The Buhag stuff was answered in the overview. I'll do it here. Yes, impacted food wars. They cause national tension. Self-explained overview. Stephen gives zero more for defense. Others are saying the worst analytical study, which is not an argument. 1NC evidence is also a study, but should be referred because it cites empirical examples of when food wars didn't happen, including Darfur, Richie, and Rwanda. 2NC piece of evidence tonight. The impact because ignore census that are currently being stored, which is explained in the overview, which makes the impact very easy to win. The next argument is that the plan takes into account rural. They have zero evidence to substantiate this argument, so you should hold them through a high threshold. Johnson says the Fed always attempts one size fits all policies that crush local flexibility. Or 2NC evidence says the U.S. Census Bureau uses a narrow definition of rural that ignores the many rural communities on the brink of urban communities because the federal census definition is geographical and is the sort of logic that Donner says in 1NC Crossing, which is like there can't be another school in 200 miles. That is overburdensome, and their Hollywalk references definitely does not substantiate this no link argument. You should definitely read it after the round. You will definitely conclude that all of our evidence is far better on this Donner example that was explained above. The other econ issues argument, they don't matter. The two each is blurted. Oblivion all cause and one error gives zero examples to me. The two error does not get to because it's impossible for us to get an answer an example we didn't hear. Unique to local economies are strong now. Other issues don't matter unless they actually happen. But you drop multiple carded pieces of evidence that say the school closure is sufficient to collapse the local economy because the overall effect of the job line, confidence, and productivity, and whether schools are good or bad and are closing or opening determines the attractiveness of rural communities, which determines their strength and vitality overall. The state's counterplan to the advocacy to the same extent, which makes any distinction arbitrary sufficiency is not answered. Anti-commandeering. I'll do that in a second. Which means a high risk of solvency and conceded assurance case means that even if they win their strongly extended framework agreements, you should still go negative. The permutation do both argument. First, judge case the counterplan if they win the permit promotes logic, and you shouldn't vote for something that's worse than the status quo. They concede a thesis of conditionality. Second, it links it results in a confusing legal mandate that bogs down rules, skills, and makes implementation possible. A very important distinction is the counterplan. Texas minimize segregation, but the one he sees says desegregate fully, which means those mandates are largely incompatible. The world of permutation would have states consult with rural leaders, and the fact ignore that consultation, and then ram the act down their throats, which causes the burdensome link that I explained on the other DA, so it overcomes consultation, which still doesn't reimburse schools, so it can't possibly solve the link, but assuages their sort of fears. They haven't made a uniqueness argument, so at first you can just kick this plank first, and they've conceded that rural schools are doing fine now. Third, they don't have any evidence. We've read a phenomenal 2NC card. This is the permutation magnifies the link that's habitual for rural schools because it creates a perception of overreach and will be perceived as explicit defiance and distrust of state rural cooperation. The spillover stuff. Holly Walker says spillover with litigated mechanisms. They conceded the 2NC argument that the 1AC is not that. It's an agency regulation for the Shapiro evidence, which means they don't access it. The counterplan, if anything, provides the same remedy because it is state courts. Holly Walker is not specific to federal courts, and the counterplan solves because people can litigate in state court mechanisms after state courts rule in favor of desegregation. Collenberg is specific in their 1AC. Hilbert Evans says state constitutions offer a better road for litigation than the only have a right to education. This is their 1AC article, and it's about state enforcement. Their strike down arguments are empirically disproven by states like California, and our Hilbert and 2NC Collenberg evidence solves that. Robinson, you dropped the indict. It's about a federal right to education, not the ass. Spillover is silly because it's about desegregation, creating social mindset changes, where the counterplan obviously accesses. The other part of this card is about the federal government doing things outside of the scope of desegregation, which they have no evidence that the plan would solve. They just have one tiny card that says that they might. Yeah, so strike down, which is a conceded argument. It's logical, and because the counterplan still stays on the books, the states could just disobey the Fed. They conceded comparative solvency claims. One is Hilbert. The federal courts reject claims on the basis that they're not intentional segregation. Milliken proves our evidence gives examples that are comparative, like federal courts failed in Kentucky and Seattle, but when Connecticut did, their own plan was 100% successful. The framing page. No, the DA commentary, not going through it, states can't solve the impact, nothing was cross-applied to 1AR, 2AR doesn't get it. There aren't any federal mandates in rural schools now. Even if they are, they're not sufficient to trigger the link. Nothing thumbs. Stephen just blurs out Title IX. That's not an agreement. Framing. The 1AR is extremely blippy here. If you think the perm shields the link, kick the counterplan for me because the 1AR doesn't contest condo. Those six played on the other flow, but the dissent infinitely outweighs. They have no card in defense except for one terrible impact card that does not assume the necessity of your dissent. The assumption behind racism first is bad. It's tautological and still relies on we push racism on back burner and then we didn't actually solve any violence. They have agreed with util in some sense because it's the most ethical model for policy making because it saves the most lives. Anything else is arbitrary and devalues certain bodies, which lapses back into the calculus they criticize. Their argument of probabilistic thinking. Stephen just says that we have one card which assumes our internal links. That's just an assertion and not true. The 2NC had a lengthy explanation of why it links just as much, and we have won a large percent of the DA, so this is irrelevant.
Okay, framing.
ready for an order? Yeah. Framing, counterplan, then the rural school system. Okay. Anyone not ready?
Top level, easy way to evaluate the framing debate. They have no explicit extension of extinction first, just an extinction of utilitarianism. The Miller and Garrett says that the only impact that matters and affects the most amount of people is racism. So you should do the best to try to take steps to confront it. It's an ethical obligation. Injures everyone, wounds and dehumanizes the subject, morally compromises those who benefited from it. Cities become more dangerous, communities less cohesive, and it's an impact that ultimately affects everyone. Their first argument is that there's no defense to the disadvantage. That'll be on the disadvantage. They said racism first is a bad logic because infinitely aggressive. That's not true because our argument is just that racism is the impact that matters, and they have not contested that fundamental thesis because they don't have an extension of extinction first. Even if they extend the util argument, we still fall under that paradigm of evaluating extinction impact. So we should win under a technical level and assume permutation do both solves the most amount of racism in the debate. The counterplan proper permutation do both does shield the link to the net effect. The consultation mechanism provided by the state's counterplan would mean that it would consult both the federal and state entities about which schools should be desegregated. It doesn't rely on the federal definition of what rural schools are. If the states are the ones that are desegregating the app and they are the ones that are being consulted, that overcomes any small risk of a link about why there's some sort of jurisdictional terrible interpretation. The first argument is that you should judge check the counterplan. That is not true. Don't allow judge check make the two-year defend a stable apps because the 2-year should not have to answer two worlds because of time and strategy skew. They say it results in confusion. Their evidence is pretty terrible about this. And what is the terminal impact to confusion other than just confusion? They say it because we say we desegregate completely. It's not competitive because the plan text says that we just desegregate schools. It does not say we fully desegregate every school in the United States. And the cross-ex explanation I did in the cross-ex explanation about the 1AC should be the way you frame this debate. We said that we wouldn't desegregate the rural schools that are incapable of desegregating. Even if you think that there's some sort of a federal definition of it, that doesn't matter. The perm magnifies the link argument was answered about because there's no terminal impact to it because confusion doesn't matter. And if you consider the Sumquist evidence and the evidence that was I can't remember the site off the top of my head, but it says that the federal government can desegregate schools. So that means that there's not going to be any confusion because the federal government has the authority. The two solvency deficits I'm going to go over first is spillover. Holly Walker evidence says that the app uniquely serves as a blueprint for other struggling reform efforts such as reducing the prison industrial complex, locking up black people in mental health facilities, and decreasing police brutality. Millions of people are obscured by these other instances of discrimination that always decide on scope of action, and probably when these cases are litigated, it sparks a broader dialogue about the value of prioritizing race and legal reform to outweigh the advocacy. It was conceded the 1NC argument about framing the risk of dissent relying on counterline solvency. There's a slight chance that the state's courts are insufficient to generate this broader dialogue. We have a huge instance of racism that outweighs the small risk of the dissent. Second, a card to articulate this was read in the 1 year. The nation's top has to set the tone, especially true in the context of Trump. If the state court acts, it's barely discussed, but at the national level, Trump will run his mouth about how he's decreased racism. That spurs broader policy. The only empirics are on our side, and the Sumquist evidence that says that the plan is key to decrease market models of education, which means that we access other offense based off of the school segregation and market models of education, which answers an explicit answer to the dissent. The dissent proper. Okay, first.
No, I have.
Okay. Never mind. The plan doesn't have to universally apply to all segregated areas. Rather, once their racial solutions are possible in the first place. You said all of their arguments about the inadequacy of rural schools can't take out the dissent or any of the arguments that we've made. The specific evidence that they've read first, the Logan and verdict evidence says that public schools are segregated and rural schools are complicit, but it doesn't make a causal argument about the ability of the plan to actually affect it. The Johnson evidence is about federal approaches overall, which doesn't disprove the F or apply specificity to the claims that they made. So you should throw it out on your own. There's no impact to this at all because the no impact to agriculture, the BW evidence, and the no impact to food security evidence answer that's the status quo both solves it. There's no empirics on their side. When countries perceive food insecurity, they result to cooperation instead of fighting against each other because they perceive it's the only way to draw some legitimacy. Second argument is the all causes and the ability for rural schools to collapse the entirety of the economy. They have no evidence on this, and you should accept the logical arguments because they've considered the Mescal evidence that said that you should reject the 1% doctrine and rely on logic to disprove some of the reasons why the disadvantage is bad, such as why rural schools are completely necessary for the entirety of food security, why they're necessary for the entirety of the rest of their impact scenario, especially in the economy. There's no turns case either, because white families, we get durable fiat. Second, it's a part of the unique link which we've disproven, and why people's are backlashing isn't a reason to vote negative, just a reason why they might be slightly angry about the plan that has no terminal impact, and their yes impact to food and their yes impact to food wars of evidence doesn't turn the impact either, because it doesn't turn the impact either because it's not a product of racism. When they've considered that racism outweighs none of this stuff matters, and they've considered the narrow definition doesn't matter.
Oh, by the way, I sent it. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, you did strategic. Oh, Monta Vista. Was there a difference between these two files? Yeah, it's twice. I think I just took sick. If you don't know there's two,
Let's just do one quick.
That's backed up. I literally never read the maturity. You go to the
it's not really.
I actually I mean, it's not bad now. It's in the way I decided.
Yeah, understandable.
No.
Oh.
That was the worst thing I've ever been in.
Wait, so
It's just like
I'm just glad you did. I get it. I'm more confused. Like, it's so much like.
This is like.
Well, you could sign.
These are back. The real transfer. That's the perfect.
Okay, this is one of the. Stay focused. I get it. Oh, yeah.
All right, everybody. I got it. Thank you all for coming to the 2018 TOC. Thank you for hanging out and watching the finals of policy debate. The winner on a 3-0 decision is the negative from Monta.
Y'all should be very proud of both teams, obviously, on getting this far. TOC is not joke. Y'all are real. Appreciate judging you throughout the year in this debate. Main thing was didn't have evidence on important questions in this debate. First thing was the link of this ad. This ad pretty made up. A lot of the link evidence from the negative is not about DSEG. It's a lot about the quality of education that's going on. So I was really hoping for affirmative evidence that clarified the process of the plan in a way that defended the explanation of it in cross-ex. Unfortunately, there wasn't that evidence. Basically, your answer that no school, like if there's not another school in 200 miles, then it means that the federal government wouldn't make the rural schools take as drastic measures, was answered by their Dayan evidence that talks about how the federal government is bad at defining what rural is. It basically says that the federal government treats rural areas as homogenous instead of heterogeneous. Now, I think you could have pushed back against this card by saying it's not really talking about race or desegregation, but the way that they're spinning it is that the federal government likes doing one-size-fits-all education policies, and it's not good at picking out the differences between rural communities. Therefore, it treats them the same. Therefore, it results in overly enforcive regulations that make it harder for those schools to stay open at the end of the day because of money issues, because of housing issues. They kind of do a decent job extrapolating a potential scenario. The second argument you have is that the plan text doesn't mean that you have to universally apply desegregation to rural schools. I'm not really buying this as well. It's a tough sell since you're defending broad desegregation for racism reasons. I think the neg cross-ex could have a question about how much desegregation you do and stuff like that. But they made arguments about how I should have a low threshold for the link because consolidation alone is sufficient to trigger their impacts. Second is your alt cause arguments, which were never really framed as an argument against the DA, instead of just like a threshold the negative has to overcome before they win a risk of the internal link. And I think they have 3 cards about why rural schools are key to the economy. One in the 1 and 2 and the 2 and C, and you just don't have a card to push back against this. You're not pulling out lines from their evidence specifically. And you could have gone a little bit more aggressive on your Mescal probability, don't start with the DA's 100% argument. But you needed to do better at poking holes at the logical fallacies of their disadvantaged link chain about how there's a difference between a broad economy and a narrow agricultural sector. Terminal impact debate. Both teams have data sets that say that food shortages cause war. Only the negative is making this recency argument about why I should care about how recent developments post 2015, 2016, whatever matter. Don't think negative turns case arguments are great, but don't think they have to be. This has a decent impact, some inroads. Counterplan, main problem was that this is ended up being just a consult counterplan with a consult good net benefit that you didn't permute as if it was a consult counterplan early enough. You needed a reason why the ask wasn't tied to immediacy or certainty. Otherwise, you have a problem with the negative argument about why the permutation isn't genuine consultation with rural communities, because it does a federal one-size-fits-all thing and then asks them how they would have liked it. But since they're winning the definition of what the plan has to be, that's problematic. Spillover solvency deficit. A lot of these cards aren't talking about federal key. They're talking about schools key. Your best card is the second Holly Walker card, but it's still not comparative. And I don't have enough 2AR explanation here, kind of drawing out how there are a bunch of cases in federal court as opposed to state courts. Best argument explanation is about how the federal government has more sort of a spotlight that they can shine on racial injustice issues, but I don't have any reason why those spillover instances of racial injustice that you might solve in the counterplan doesn't, why those are the key instances of racism that we should fight that are more important to the instances of racism the counterplan solves, or a comparison about why one outweighs the other. So even if the federal government can draw a little bit more attention, I don't know why it's overwhelmingly more attention to make it so I don't care about the counterplan anymore. So risk of DA, risk of counterplan solvency, great debate, appreciated it, obviously all great, and I liked the fact that this was a wrapping up of the education topic that was the biggest education issue in my head, desegregation, and the state's counterplan made up this head. That's kind of funny.
I guess I'll go next. I want to begin obviously by saying congratulations to both of you for making it to the finals of this tournament and obviously doing a great job. Seems like the tournament gets harder and more competitive every other year, and so being able to push through is really great. Whether or not, I know I heard some of you sound like you're going to continue debating in college. Some of you may not be seniors, but best of luck in wherever you go next in life, whether that's the college and debate, whether it's not. I'm sure you all had a lot of potential and did really well. I'm sure you'll thrive in the college debate community as well. So best of luck with that. I'll keep it short because I know it's really late. Short of the decisions, I ultimately end up thinking the counterplan solves a lot of the affirmative solvency deficits that the 2AR is going for, and I think the same conclusion the DA is going to outweigh. I think the problem for me with the counterplan specifically is I think you really kind of narrow down and lower the threshold for what the neg needs to do to solve the app spillover arguments. The spillover claim isn't necessarily anymore that you create a new legal precedent. It isn't that you do anything uniquely good. It's just that you create a national dialogue. That's kind of the way the 2AR really frames this, the president needs to get involved. And I agree that you have this Rogers card, which I think is the best card on this specific solvency deficit. And it is really good at being Congress, president, and the federal government should get involved with the issue. I think it's the same problem that Theo cites with the other cards. It's not comparative. It's this article's recommendation for how to create a national dialogue. I think the negative has a counterplan, and there's the arguments about why it creates a right to education, state constitutions. It creates a national dialogue because all 50 states kind of get involved. I think there's the biggest missed opportunity, and I think the way I would think about it, that I would change my strategy is I would characterize the entire neg strat at being we should care more about the rural portions of the country that predominantly voted for Trump and are racist, and base our national policies about race around their wishes and desires. That's the entire consultation portion of the plan. That's the solvency deficit we're going to go for. And the 2AR, that the counterplan, those areas need to be coerced to be able to solve, and that's the counterplan can't solve it. I wrote down a lot of thoughts and suggestions, which I won't get into. That this ad, end up thinking that there's a large risk of the impact because of the distinctions that the 2AR kind of goes for, and that you all kind of just rely on your generics to solve. The link debate, I think there's two questions. Theo answered all the reasons why I don't think the 200-mile geography thing is one that I can just hold my hat on and vote act on. The other link argument I think should have been better discussed is just, is it burdensome in the first place? Is it actually that hard for schools to desegregate? Would it actually cause anyone to shut down? And I think that, I don't think it's necessarily really burdensome, but I don't think either team is explaining one way or the other. And so I don't think there's a super large risk to the link for that reason, but I think there's enough of a link I don't think that anyone does the work for me to justify why I should just vote on it's not burdensome to begin with, especially if the comp plan kind of solves a lot of the stuff you're going for.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree that it's funny. I think everyone had a different solvency deficit they liked. I liked Sunquist the best. I didn't think the Robinson evidence was about deseg. I thought it was about right to education. The other part, the first Polly Walker 12 evidence, I thought had something closest to like offense against the states because it discussed like states politics as a reason to like states politics is a reason why the state's court system might fail because politics get in the way of those decisions. I almost feel like fiat probably overcomes that. Was referring more to the decision involved in that, but I don't think they made that argument. So I still decided, all right, there's some state politics that are in the way of some of the implementation and enforcement. The problem is I think that the Hilbert evidence that I didn't think was really comparatively addressed states that the federal government recognizes the states need to get involved because of those state politics, because they're so far away from those that they can't really interact with them. So I end up thinking that there's moderate impact to both those and the state's politics. I don't know to what extent what the impact exactly is to it, because that Holly Walker 12 evidence, you're going for like it spills over to those larger issues, and I think that that's an important part of the carbon. That's like pages different than the part where it's talking about the states, and I don't think that the state politics is referring to the spillover argument. So I didn't think there was really a comparative piece of evidence, which is why I like the Sunquist, because Sunquist was at least like federal sends the system. Ultimately, I ended up thinking that it was almost played to something where both solved equally, because the Hilbert evidence saying that the right to education clause allows states more interpretive opportunities, and comparing that to the evidence that was like the federal government is too far away and can't interact as much, and that the local solutions are better. So ultimately, I think that the state solvency deficit was not super well impacted nor substantiated by the evidence, and I think that I actually think the neg did a little better job on the comparative the comparative examples between the counterplan solvency and the app solvency. So where I think they started with the disad, I started with the counterplan and thinks that it resolves something close to all the app. Now, the double solvency arguments, like racism first, double solvency, I'm not sure what that looks like. Is this like especially desegregated, or is this in the context of extreme spillover? I didn't know what that exactly looks like, and given that I know, like I think we all agree that the turns of the case arguments weren't stellar, but I also think that they weren't really answered. So I think that there's an aspect of racism, both of the terminal impact of the disad as well as kind of like they don't even need to win the terminal impact of the disad because there will be backlash from school closures and things like that. So once I get to the disad, I think I just need to establish that there's a link, and I completely agree with what Theo said. I think this disad is garbage and not real. There were two things you all could do in this instance, like hurry and try and cut a card, or already have a better access to some of the implementation mechanisms that you could reference in order to prove this kind of 200-mile argument that you were talking about, or you could like just sit on their evidence and talk intricately about each one and go for the no link that way. One of those two things probably had to happen to win like zero risk of a link. And, in this instance, I don't think you get very close there. I agree with the assessment for the impacts that both were, both had statistical analysis, and their kind of time frame argument I don't think was directly responded to, and so I think that there's a risk of that terminal impact too. So ultimately, risk of the disad, double perm, wasn't sure exactly what how to envision that, and I think the counterplan solves nearly all of the app. I'll echo the great sentiments though. Super impressive, Monta Vista. I haven't been in the same tournament as you all, but seeing your success from afar has been staggering, very impressive, especially given all are self-motivated and the help is limited. Very, very impressive run. Blue Valley senior success all year. One of my very favorite things is just to like sit outside and listen to you. I think you're one of the clearest, most concise, most logical teams that exist. I thought you were fabulous all year. Good luck in college.
Earlier.